Hello everyone, my name is Andrew Montlake, but you can call me Monty, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the very first episode of Pathfinders. The Pathfinder podcast is about the journeys we take in business and in our life. It's about the fact that the destination is not the be-all and end-all, it's the paths we take along the way that is a real journey. It is this that defines us and makes us who we are today. I've always loved talking to people, and in doing so over the years, and especially so recently, have found that many have remarkable stories to tell. Stories that we can all learn from and relate to, that will make you look differently at that person when you learn about their real journey rather than the one we all assume. So I'm setting out to meet real people who've inspired me, both within the mortgage, property and finance industry and outside it, to hear their stories and learn from the paths they have taken, the successes and failures that have led them to become who they are today. We all have a story to tell, and perhaps their story will resonate with yours and make you realise that you are never alone. We are all pathfinders, finding our way in the world. First up, I'm delighted to be joined by someone I've always admired within the property industry. In a world where everyone seems to think they are an entrepreneur, today's guest, Ying Tan, really is a successful one. Ying has a background in investment banking and accounting, as well as buy-to-let portfolio that led him into the mortgage world, and is a forward-thinking, innovative and dynamic entrepreneur with a proven track record who thrives in founding, scaling and exiting businesses. He founded the buy-to-let business, later to become Dynamo, in February 2006 and exited in May 2021, having turned his company into one of the leading mortgage brokers in the UK. Ying started to create a substantial profitable property portfolio in 1996 and has been instrumental in the success of numerous property investors worldwide. Not only that, he's a board advisor, fintech enthusiast, angel investor, speaker and a successfully published author who is currently exploring further investment advisor opportunities for entrepreneurial businesses who want to achieve their dreams. I'm sure his story will be of interest to you. This is the Pathfinder podcast. May the path you take be the right one for you. Ying, welcome.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Wow, I mean, I'm honoured that I am the first guest, and what a great title and what a great podcast to bring to the community. That that it's all about choosing and finding the right path, and no one person is exactly the same. And like you, I've always really enjoyed inspiring people and helping people learn from my good things and indeed the bad things. So hopefully I can share some golden nuggets today. Yeah,
good. I hope so. It's you sort of became the natural choice to be my first guest, actually, because I was reading your book.
Oh wow.
And I'm still reading your book, so I must confess I haven't finished it yet, but it's a good book. Don't push too many trolleys, and we'll come on to that in due course. But I wanted to start first off with just saying, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, really good, mate, really good. Life since exiting Dynamo has been good. Obviously, a little bit more in the slow lane, which is really great. I spend my time now, obviously, with my family and in my advisory positions and investments. I do a bit of property development, although I can barely, change a nut or
you're not
like
hands-on.
No, not the most hands-on. I'm good at directing. Look at that, far too soft. But yeah, I'm pretty good at directing. So doing a couple of property investments in Hampstead at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's life is good, but keeping myself at mischief, as they say.
And you've got your big family.
Yes.
So 5 kids.
Yes. Well, I had 3 boys.
Yeah.
You think that's pretty, I guess, normal-ish. You kind of say, well, it'd be really nice to have, a girl, wouldn't it? And my wife said, yeah, but, got twins in the house. I said, don't be silly, twins. That's never going to happen. Oh, my God. Yeah, there you go. Sod's law, as they say. And, yes, my eldest is now 18 going to university or planning to go to university. My youngest 2 girls are 3 years old. So, it's their absolute joy. I got my hands full. Or I should say, I support my wife who's got her hands full.
And that's interesting because it's like you always wanted to have a good a big family. Yeah. And actually reading your book, obviously I'm interested in your journey and how you get to where you are today. But one of the things that really comes through from the book is how family and family values really seems to pervade through everything you do. Where does that come from? Is that something from an early age you got?
It's definitely from an early age. My father hitchhiked, shall I say, from Malaysia to here in England in 1957, I think it was. He was 19 years old, and you and I, we're clearly not as old as that. But imagine what we were doing at 19. We certainly weren't hitchhiking halfway around the world.
How long did that take him?
4.5 months.
Wow.
He kind of took a ferry, or not ferry, a boat, I guess, to Sri Lanka, and then kind of worked his way through India, Pakistan, through the Middle East, kind of down to Italy, Greece, Italy, and then up through France. So, amazing. And, that's probably a whole podcast session in itself, just talking about some of his trials and tribulations.
Yeah, I can imagine.
If you're talking about where that kind of drive and hunger comes from, I guess it's from, that DNA of, setting a goal like my dad set. He was the eldest of 12 children. He had a small village in Malaysia. If you visualise, chickens in the garden and cows roaming around, that was the village.
Wow.
And I guess he felt the big burden of responsibility being the eldest of 12 children. And he wanted to better his life. So he'd been reading loads of newspapers and going, hitchhiking, a lot of people hitchhiking from Europe over to Asia. What about going the other way? And obviously it was the Commonwealth then, so the kind of borders were open for Malaysians, part of Commonwealth, to England. So he set on his journey, and like I said, he had £20 in his pocket. When he was in India, he got chucked into jail. In Pakistan, he almost died of food poisoning, and he went with this guy, Monty, and you kind of think you're kind of camaraderie and all that type of stuff, but it was survival of the fittest. And my dad got food poisoning. The doctor said he was 50-50 whether he was going to make it, and the person he was with actually took his belongings and continued the journey and left him, as they say, for dead. So I think, but my dad was very forgiving. He never kind of, in fact, when he knew I was writing a book, he never really wanted me to be so explicit to kind of probably say the true hardship he faced during that time. But I think a lot of my drive and hunger comes from that DNA. That vision that he set, that he wanted to better his life. There was, once he started that journey, there was no turning back.
Yeah.
There was times in the Middle East where he was, sleeping under bridges and schools and, the blistering heat, walking in the desert for hours upon hours. But, he made the journey. And one of the stories that always sticks out at me was literally at the final gate, because he'd run out of money, was at Calais and wanted to get across. And the captain from a ship kept walking past him and said, I think it was the third day, he said, son, I've seen you there a few times. What are you doing? He goes, I've trekked all this way from Malaysia. I want to get across to the UK. So the captain looked at him and said, look, why don't you come with me? My dad was obviously ecstatic. And he put him on at no cost onto the boat and went across on his journey. The first job he actually got when he got to England was working as a kitchen hand in Marble Arch. The Cumberland Hotel, I think it's the Hard Rock now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And with his first paycheck, he promised that he would pay the man back, because that was what he's promised. And as one of the traits that's always stuck with me is, if you say you're going to do something, you do it.
Yeah.
And he did that and paid him back. And, many people, I think the one thing that's really taught me about that journey is the ripple effect that people can have on your lives. If my dad didn't have that perseverance, so that captain didn't allow him to come on the ship, and all the many people helped him along his way, I wouldn't be sitting here. I know it's pretty obvious saying it, but I wouldn't be sitting here having this podcast with you, telling me about my journey. And I think sometimes, I know it can be a little bit deep, but if we step back and we kind of visualize the impact that everything we do in life has a ramification and ripple on other things that are going on, and to realize that it's not just about you, it's much bigger than that. The decisions you make are much bigger than what we just do for ourselves. So that's, I think, where that drive and hunger and desire to do well comes from.
That's really interesting, and that's something that I've always been interested in. Is and that shows so much about his character, and obviously that's come through into your character. If you say you're going to do something, but also never forget those who help you along the journey. And actually, I see that quite a lot. Certainly, in my experience, sometimes some of the people you help aren't quite so remembering of what you've done for them, and etc. And that's one thing that. And it's easy, always upset me.
And it's easy to be bitter because, hang on, I opened a few doors or whatever it was, and it's easy to kind of, be angry is not the right word, but
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
upset. Well, how come you haven't remembered what I did? But I try, and I know maybe it's the Buddhist in me, but I try to forgive, and try and say, well, okay, everyone is different, right? Everyone has different ways of expressing themselves. Everyone has different ways of doing things, and I'm a big believer in karma, and I'll continue to do what I do, and know that, to be fair, the majority are thankful. The majority are showing gratitude, and it makes me hugely happy when I see people on LinkedIn, former staff, for example, doing posts and saying thank you, for giving me the opportunity, and small things like that give me more satisfaction than some of the bigger, more material things. Because it shows you've impacted in someone's life. So,
absolutely.
But I think that's where my drive comes from. My mum and dad, but that was just the beginning of the story, because obviously they came here and they struggled. My mum and dad had 2 jobs for all of their life in the late 80s, when interest rates were shooting up.
Yeah.
I'm sure some can resonate given our current macroeconomic climate about that. They had 2 jobs. My dad was a cleaner, wasn't a traditional kind of Chinese immigrant who had a takeaway shop or anything like that. He had a second job as a cleaner in a local hospital. My mum was working in a factory, boxing the perfumes together. So, and you see them work hard at that, and you kind of come back at 10 o'clock and they still make sure there's food on the table for you. They make sure, you've got nice clothes to wear and all that type of stuff. I was spending £100 on Air Jordan trainers back then. And I'm thinking, I don't even spend that money on my kids now, but they made it work for me. They wanted to give me, and I think, that background I came from just made me very driven to, to be successful, however you deem success.
So what were you like as a kid? Were you a bit of a tearaway, or?
I was, I grew up in a council estate,
Yeah.
so I was relatively streetwise. I got into lots of flights, had my fair few black eyes and whatnot, and it was pretty tough, but I was very sporty. And I think, people often ask about my childhood and was it difficult? Did I experience racism, for example? And, as a kid, there were kids who would refer to me as chinky, or they would refer to the Chinese food that we eat as chinky and all that. And I didn't like it. Mum used to tell me and say, look, stand up to them, don't allow that. And I did. And I think some of it was rightly or wrongly, clearly, but it was not that they were being mean or horrible, but it was just the culture in the 80s that was normal or accepted. But I always stood up to it, and I think I was sporty and relatively streetwise, and because of that, I earned the respect of my peers, and certainly I often credit, and this shows gratitude, my sports teacher at school when I was growing up. I remember reaching out to him when I was in my early 20s to thank him for everything that he did, because he made me captain of the football team, the cricket team, and I generally think, while I wasn't a vocal person, just barking orders, I always led by example, and I think that gave me the confidence and gave the other people around me, the hard kids and the kids from the estates and things, to give me the respect, which helped me kind of get on in life, I guess. So, and I generally use those examples as giving me the platform for the business success I've had, and again, it's showing that gratitude and you talk about a path. I generally think, him making me captain, even though I was the only non-white person in my school, that I wasn't necessarily very vocal, but I worked hard. That small token that he gave me, I think shaped my life.
So you were singled out as a potential leader back then.
Yeah.
Really, and that's really interesting. So talking about paths, where did you think your first path? What was your first planned path, so to speak? Where did you think that teenage Ying would end up? Apart from playing for Liverpool.
For Liverpool was the dream that clearly would never ever happen. But I certainly dreamt about it when I was young, like most kids growing up. So I guess I came from a Chinese, East Asian background, so it was very much education. I've got a sister who's 10 years older than me. She's a qualified accountant, although she wanted to be a doctor when she was young. So it was very much, you be a doctor, you be an accountant, you be an engineer, those type of professions. Very traditional. So that was the route I took. I took an accounting finance degree at Kingston. I'm a qualified accountant. But I've never practiced as an accountant. I never envisaged I would be an accountant for the rest of my life. But I kind of use those professional qualifications as my kind of insurance policy, that if the entrepreneurial dream, because you don't have to be an MBA graduate from Harvard to become a businessman. You could leave school at 16, right?
No, absolutely.
But by having those qualifications gave me the insurance policy. If things didn't work out, I could have something to fall back on. So I guess the young Ying always wanted to be an entrepreneur. You know, I mentioned my mum worked at the factory. She would get seconds, I should say, perfume, and I would sell that. You know, I'd go to school and she'd buy it for 50p and I'd sell it for
Right.
£2.50. And I guess that was my kind of early stage of entrepreneurship. I'd go to Blackbush Market, which at the time was the biggest market in southeast England. And
Yeah.
I'd go and buy crisps, you know, big bulk buy crisps and things and sell them individually for like a 100% markup. So I guess that was my early kind of venture into entrepreneurship.
So you had it in you.
Yeah, I
from
think
a young
so.
age. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think so. And I'd have gone to the sweet shop, you know, we had a local kind of corner shop nearby, and I'd go in there. And I remember having this conversation with one of the guys saying, you know, if you want to make more sales, you need to position your top selling items in the middle, so it's within the eye line and that type of stuff. And I guess as I reflect on it now, even talking to you, I guess I had that kind of entrepreneurship blood in me quite young, even though the family didn't, because, you know, that's a risk. You know, even when I left, and I'm sure we'll come on to that after, you know, my 6-figure salary at Goldman Sachs, I was 26 years old and, you know, wanted to start the buy-to-let business or go into my own. My mum was like, "What, are you crazy? You've got a good job there. You're on a good career path. Why would you want to chuck that in?" And, you know, it took me a while until the business was at a stage where, you know, Mum said, "Oh, you know, you made the right choice." But, you know, I was well into my kind of early 30s by then. So, yeah, it's I guess, so going back to your question, Monty, it was very much, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but knew that I had to do certain things to give me the platform first. And, of course, being an accountant is massively helpful in running businesses.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing that I really like, it shows a lot about you and your character. And I'm sure if there's any youngsters listening, they will not understand this. You went to UBS, was it?
Yes.
For free?
Yes.
What, WTF?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a phrase
that's
there.
what most of the kids would be saying.
Yeah, so why was that, and what did that give you?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Kingston University, which was an okay university, but it wasn't a Russell Group. It wasn't Oxford or Cambridge. And, you know, my A-levels and my degree were okay, but they were not exceptional. And I knew that for me to get ahead in life, I had to people had to see me and not just a piece of paper. And, you know, I applied for hundreds of jobs, you know, when I was at university and turned down accountancy, chartered accountancy, qualification, all the big six. But luckily, through my sister's friends, luckily she was 10 years older than me and she knew people, you know, I was more higher up in the career ladder, that they secured some work experience for me. And they said, but the downside, Ying, unfortunately, is you're not going to get paid. I said, it's not an issue. And they were like shocked. You don't mind? That's not an issue at all. How long do you need to work for? And this wasn't a week or 2 weeks. You know, this went on for, you know, the whole summer holidays, for 2 summer holidays. And I guess for me, it was allowed me to get into the role, to work hard and to be noticed. And it's about, you know, that short-term pain clearly, because, you know, I'm not getting paid, but for the long-term gain. And I generally think those opportunities I did, you know, to this day, you know, if you ask about my background, I still say I was one of the youngest vice presidents at Goldman Sachs at the age of 26. You know, my investment in that's 20 years ago, but still part of my story. Yeah. And I would not have been that if I hadn't had the opportunity to work at UBS and for free, but then offered a job. You know, I think my first job I was earning about, you know, when I graduated in 96, you know, 25 grand, which is a lot of money back then. And there's no way I would have had that had I not made those initial sacrifices. And one, you know, you mentioned youngsters. My biggest challenge for some youngsters is that they're looking for that instant gratification. Yeah, always instant. Yeah. I need it now. But I'm still an old school, and I believe in, you know, delayed gratification. That, you know, you got to work for what you get, and if you reap what you sow. So that's the mantra I've always lived by, and I guess it's worked for me so far.
I've literally, in the meeting before this podcast, I had that conversation with one of our people. Wow. Literally, it's about running before you can walk, and actually, you know, this is your first year. Don't expect to be like some of the guys who've been here for 20 years. That's right. Just straight away. But that instant gratification now is so. It seems to be ingrained in people. I
mean, even in WhatsApp, you know, if you send a WhatsApp message to someone and they haven't responded within, you know, a few minutes or whatever, you kind of think, oh, do they not like me? Are they ignoring me? They want everything instantly. And, you know, obviously, you know, being in the tech world that I am as well, you know, everything, you know, digitised, you press a button, it comes out. And there's certain things that are great to be instant, you know, don't get me wrong, but there's certain traits in a person that, you know, I still believe are vitally important, and one of those is to realise that, you know, certainly in a career and building something, you can't get a respect just by turning up by who you are. You've got to work for it, you've got to earn it, and that takes time. And you talked about some of your team. When I was building Dynamo, that's the message I'd give the mortgage advisors. You are going to go through pain and hardship for those 6 months. You're going to be earning less money than you ever earned before, because you're taking a pay cut from coming from whatever industry. But if you work hard, knuckle down, you will reap what you sow. And I'm super proud that so many people have stuck it out and gone on to build great careers within the industry at Dynamo and indeed elsewhere. So it's one of the things that I struggle with even with my own children, to try and get that message. And dare I say, it's easier to get through to someone you're paying and your own staff than your own children. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't get through to them with their phones glued to their to their eyes.
This is true.
So Goldman Sachs, then that must have been an exciting time, especially if you rising so quickly. And what was it like working there at the time, and then that sudden decision to upset your parents and say, actually, do you know what, I'm going to go and do this now?
Yeah, well, Goldman's was I guess it still is, it's the pinnacle of kind of investment banking. That's the bank everyone wanted to work for. They used to say that in Fleet Street, where the Goldman's was, they used to have more millionaires per square metre than anywhere else in the world, and all that type of stuff. So it's like, oh wow, I want to work for Goldman's. And working for American companies is very different. Long hours. I often kind of roll my eyes a little bit when some people who work for you, they're kind of 9 to 5, and they stay 10 minutes late, and they're kind of moaning about it. And kind of think, God, we used to get in early hours in the morning, work late and light, go out, have a few drinks, and out till 2 o'clock in the morning entertaining, and still get up for 7, 8 o'clock to do the next day. It was a tough, but we were paid well, and obviously it was a great job. But the moment of kind of quitting investment banking was quite poignant, really. I spent a lot of time in New York, obviously being an American firm. And I was in New York in September the 10th, which was obviously the day the world changed with the Twin Towers. And my boss at the time asked me to come back to the UK because, I had to kind of finish off a project. At that time, I was a little bit grumpy and goes, why am I going back? And I remember vividly as I walked in to the trading floor on September the 11th, and, a little bit later on, obviously, the screens were showing these Twin Towers burning down. And I remember, because I was on a course before, one of the guys was flying a light aircraft around New York, and you could fly a light aircraft around the kind of the high-rise buildings then. And I remember thinking, God, it must. I hope it's not him, and he's crashed his light aircraft. Obviously, it transpired it was the jets and it was hijacked. But seeing that fall down made me kind of reflect and say, if I was there at the time, which I wasn't in the Twin Towers, but our building was like a block away. But how would have I reflected on my life? Is this what I wanted to continue to do?
Wow.
And the answer was very clearly it wasn't. Although I was 26, still quite young, I felt like I hadn't achieved what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to chase my entrepreneurial dream, and and to be fair, I've never ever earned as much money, even to this day at 47, as I was earning at Goldman Sachs at the time. But it doesn't really matter, because obviously I've had a nice exit, and that's where I've earned the money now. But I've never paid myself that money, but that was okay. But that was the moment that I realised that I had to leave investment banking, and I told my mum I'm going to go to China to spend 6 months in China to learn Chinese, because I'm being Chinese, but I couldn't speak Mandarin. So I spent 6 months there, and then when I came back, I went full time into property. About 3 or 4 years, I built quite a large property portfolio, but got sick of the landlords, the tenants and the architects and all that type of stuff. And I said, I'm going to set up a business. But and it was 2006 in a small Regis office in Guildford, where the buy-to-let business was founded. And that was really because at the time, sad to say in our industry, but I'm sure it's not a reflection of you, because you were probably trading at the time. But I was thinking, if I was going to my mortgage broker, telling them what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And I thought, blimey, if that's the best
it
that they can
me,
do
was it?
It definitely wasn't. It was a chap in Fleet.
Right.
So unless you relocated since then, but it was. He wasn't giving me the added value I wanted, and was very much a generalist. So I said, I'm going to set up a brokerage specifically for buy-to-let. It wasn't anything new or groundbreaking. There were big firms at the time, Landlord Mortgages, the Money Centre, as big as what Dynamo is today. But so it was nothing groundbreaking, but I wanted to build a business which served that customer. And because I'd never been a mortgage broker before, I'd never worked for a mortgage broker before, I got CMAP qualified, I had a clean slate, and I kind of built something that I wanted, what service I wanted to receive as a customer. And kind of that was 2006, and as they say, the rest is history.
So it sounds like you had a real. I'm picturing all of this as a film now.
Yeah,
And
as
you've
long
got
as it's not
this.
me
You've
acting
got
in
this going to China. That's a real proper find yourself
Yes.
moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you're
Well,
just trying to make sense of what do you
What
want
do you
to
want?
do, and
Yeah.
that's brilliant. I can really see
Well,
that.
I mean, you'll laugh when I say this bit is that, it is a find yourself
Yeah.
moment, because, I'd partied pretty hard in London at 21 to 26, and I guess it's fair to say to a degree I was burnt out. And
Yeah.
and when I went to China, I stopped drinking. I shaved my hair off, literally,
Right, okay,
like
yeah.
a monk type thing.
You
and
really
it was,
went for
I
it,
really
didn't
went for it. It was eye opening. And actually, I say I met my wife there. My best mate was having similar challenges at work and wanted to travel. And I said to him, should we go to China? And he said yes. So he came along, and he said, oh, by the way, I want to bring my younger sister. I said, what are you bringing your younger sister for? We're going to be babysitting all the time. And that was what Samantha became my wife.
Hilarious.
So we travelled
Yeah.
a bit of London, the rest of the world, and but we spent 6 months learning Chinese, which was an amazing experience, and that was before the Beijing Olympics. So it was a bit more, not as modern as it is now, put it that way.
Yeah.
I remember going to the McDonald's for the first time. It was I think it was the first McDonald's in Beijing, and it was like, don't have a McDonald's, and it was a real novelty to have a Big Mac. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's quite film worthy, but certainly was a big pivotal moment in my life.
Oh, was that the trip? There's a great picture in the book of you watching the World Cup on the
Cup,
Great Wall of China.
That's right.
That
it
looks
was
brilliant.
4-0. I remember that so vividly. 4-0 to Brazil against China. And it's just one of those weird things. You're in the middle of nowhere, right, Monty? And you kind of think, you're hiking along the kind of the Great Wall. And it wasn't like a commercial area. It was really run down, and you had to jump over areas, otherwise you'd fall 50 feet down. And we'd done hiked about 30, 40 kilometres, and this guy kind of popped out from nowhere, and kind of he said, "Do you want? You cold? You don't want to keep yourself warm for the night?" And we said, "Yeah, we'd love to." And he kind of went away, came back, had all this firewood for us, and he kept us warm. It was brilliant. And then he goes, "Do you want to watch the football?" I said, "Watch the football." And you kind of look around. Where would you get electricity from here? And he popped back, and guess what? There was a beer, which is a God save, as well as a black and white TV. And God knows if he was like pedalling below, but the electricity was running, and we were watching the game, and it was the most surreal moment.
That's really surreal.
Watching 2002 China being the home, obviously where I was, versus Brazil, the best kind of nation in the world, on the Great Wall of China with a beer, in this remote part of this war. It was just absolutely bizarre.
Brilliant.
But yeah.
So, building a business then. This is what a lot of people will be interested in. What was it like those early years? You spoke about your vision for the business, and obviously you started 2006, so we know what happened a couple of years later.
Absolutely.
How did you get through that time when you probably thought, actually, do you know what, we're doing all right, building a business, and then whoomp, everything comes crashing down?
That's exactly what happened. 2006 February we set up. It was me, myself, and I in that Regis office in Guildford, and we got to about 25 strong by 2008. And this is good. It's just super growth. The market was exploding. Northern Rock, Lehman's happened, blah de blah, and suddenly we were getting all of those calls with lenders pulling out of the market, stop lending, etc., etc. It was mayhem. And I know many will resonate. Maybe not quite on the same scale, but very similar in the last. Couple of months. Yeah. And it was really tough because I had set the business up myself. But I was a 30-year-old at the time, Chinese guy in a generally middle-aged white environment.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel confident enough to do this by myself. So I reached out to a couple of friends. One was a chap who I met when I worked at Chesington World Adventures. He was going to be the sales director. And the other one was someone I used to work at Deutsche Bank with, and he was, more of a white, middle-aged, middle-class man. And I felt that I needed to have that kind of combination.
That's really interesting.
When I set up the business. And we see each other all the time at these do's. But I remember going to the do's in the early days and thinking, this is so intimidating. I'd stand there in the cocktail room, didn't know anybody, and I'd stand there by myself, barely no mates. But I said, I'm going to stick this out. I didn't want to drink too much to make an idiot of myself, but I wanted to kind of slowly build myself up, the brand up, the business up, etc., etc. But it was tough, and 2008 came and hit us hard, and we had to downsize quite aggressively. But I guess the fact that we were still a young startup allowed us to be agile. And I think that's one of the benefits of being a smaller company in a tough environment is make sure you have that agility, make sure you have the ability to make tough decisions, and be decisive about them. Because if you dither too much, if you prolong things, that's where challenges can happen.
So credit crunch is over, and you're starting to build your business back up again. I think by that time, your two partners had left and exited. They felt that they couldn't stick it out.
Yeah, I mean, dare I say, from a personal perspective, probably the best deal I could have done, because they didn't want to stick it out because we weren't paying ourselves. Get the violin out. Probably like many, 2008 to 2011 didn't pay yourselves a penny. But luckily, I had a portfolio I could fall back on. The other two, weren't willing to do that and didn't maybe believe in the vision, and the market was tough. So by then, I guess at the bottom of the market, I bought them out, and I had 100% control of the business. They'd exit, and we were actually in a room not too dissimilar from this, Monty, and we all wrote on a piece of paper, who wants to stay and who wants to go. They both said stay. I said stay. They both said go, and you kind of reflect again of those pivotal moments and what path you took. That second just changed the direction of the business and where I took it.
But you never wavered in your vision and what you knew that you could do and what you could achieve in terms of the company and the type of company you wanted to build.
I was passionate about service. I knew that what we were offering was better than our competition in the space of buy-to-let, and I just wanted to. I'm quite single-minded in hopefully a good way. In that, if I set that goal, not too dissimilar from my dad. He knew he was going to come to the UK and he was going to go there no matter what. And I believed in the property market. I believed that it would come back, and we would be positioned well to take advantage of that by focusing on some of the infrastructure, the systems. So when the market did return, we would be leading the curve. And thankfully, I was lucky enough and proven right from that perspective. So I never wavered.
So it was. So actually, from my own memory, you're right about there was definitely a very different atmosphere after the credit crunch than before, and I can understand why you would feel maybe like an outsider at those times. Certainly, some of the events. I mean, I felt like an outsider at some of those events. Yeah. Have you noticed that change from a? And did that happen sort of immediately after that? A lot of the cowboys left the industry, and actually it was a much better industry for it, a bit better regulation. And I know, we've been working hard to try and change the industry and make sure it is more, not only more diverse, we can get more diverse people in, but also that if there's another young Ying going to an event, then surely they shouldn't feel as an outsider. And have you found that actually really starting to change?
I mean, the industry has come on leaps and bounds in the last 10 or 15 years, and I hope to think that I've been involved in some small part of that. And if I see someone that's standing on themselves in the cocktail room, I actually go out and actively trying to bring them in, and and introduce myself and ask who they are and that type of thing. But I think as I'm hugely passionate about the industry and a massive fan of what the mortgage industry has achieved, and I think not saying or prejudging what it was like back in the mid 2000s, but I think where we are now, the champions and the leaders that we have that are driving this industry forward is just hugely inspiring. You're clearly one of those, and I also look up to. You mentioned that I inspired you. I think it's fair to say you've inspired me along your journey as well.
I don't know why.
I think there's a real pendulum swing now. It's certainly more diverse, hugely more inclusive. I think I'm certainly not. I don't act alone when you're at these events where it used to be seen as a little bit old school boy, network and very cliquey. Now it's just quite a different vibe to it, and long may that continue.
Well, I mean, without leaders like you, we need people for the young Yings and any young people coming in to look up to and think, okay, there is a place for me. I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not about what I look like. I don't need to fit a stereotype. Or a perceived norm. So that's hugely
Agreed.
important.
Yeah, agreed.
So what were your biggest life lessons? What were the biggest knocks?
Yeah.
Personally or business that have taught you? There's a few you mention in the book.
There's a few. I mean, the book title, for example, that's not a massive knock, but it was a big lesson to kind of wind back why the title is "Don't Push Too Many Trolleys." It was my first
a great
day.
title.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first day. I worked at Asda. I was probably 17. Doing my A levels, doing a part-time job. I remember getting a job at Asda, and I was like, oh, what a trolley boy. I could have been at checkouts or working produce or the warehouse, but a trolley boy, that's like the lowest of the low type of thing. But, I did it, and I remember quite emotionally, actually, that my mum, I never knew this until much later, but my mum would come and watch me in the car park. And,
really?
She would be really upset that I had to work, because they couldn't afford to give me, and she would cry in the car because I was pushing trolleys, it was pissing down with rain, and I reflect on that, and I think, God, while she didn't stop me because clearly she knew I needed the money, because they couldn't provide for me, you kind of think that, and that's links back again to my drive and why I wanted to be successful. So I didn't, my children didn't have to have the same. The title really comes because on my first day working at Asda, I was being the competitive winner I was. I remember some guy challenged me, said, look, I can push 15 trolleys. I said, 15 trolleys? I'll do 20. And I'm literally there having no idea, didn't realise it was an art to push trolleys, but believe you me, it is an art. One is bad enough, and I try and push 15 or 20 there. So I was pushing it, and I kind of veered off to the right, and I go, right, this has lost control. And I smashed into this spanking new BMW. And it was a life lesson for me because whilst obviously as the paid for the damage repair and all that type of stuff, I remember being hauled into the manager's office and got a good scene to, and I kind of thinking, God, what could I have done better? And I said, you know what? First of all, I tried to spin too many plates. I tried to push too many trolleys effectively and juggle too many balls, and I should have maybe not taken it all at once, and that was a massive life lesson for me. I didn't necessarily learn from it because I think later, which I again describe in the book, I was really busy in the year 2000, and my mum and dad just retired to go back to Malaysia, and I was moving house from Wimbledon to Surrey Quays near Canada Water, but I'd sold the place, and really I should have allowed the two, to kind of be seamless so I could move from one to the other, but I hadn't. I was effectively living out my car, and I was quite what's the word, possessive over my possessions, and I said, rather than keep my valuables somewhere, I'm just going to keep it in the car, safe there. So I chucked everything in the car, and I was just doing too many things. It was year 2000. I was going to surprise my mum and dad to go to Asia on a kind of a last minute Malaysia trip and surprise them. I was really busy with the Y2K project at Deutsche Bank. I was trying to do renovations. I was trying, and I was still trying to enjoy my life. I was just taking on too much. And someone broke into the car and stole everything. And it was, I don't know if you have a briefcase or anything like that, but I've got a briefcase. I certainly did then, where I had my, my birth certificate, my passports, my valuables, etc., etc. And there was nothing hugely monetary value, but it had a couple of possessions from my grandmother, and she'd only recently died a year or two before that. And obviously that had all gone. So it taught me a lesson again, and firstly from the trolleys, but secondly from that moment where my car got broken into when I was just trying to do too much, that I need to take a step back and once when I'm doing something, to focus on one. And I think that helped me in building the buy-to-let business, because I wanted to focus on just that buy-to-let niche initially. It's very easy to go, but residential you can make money, second charges, bridging. I said, I know that, but I need to become the best at buy-to-let first. And that was the mindset we took. Of course, we branched out into all the others afterwards, but we became the best at buy-to-let first. And I think those lessons, and at the time you don't realise it, right? You go, God, why is the world like this to me? But I think how the philosophical person I've tried to be is, everything happens for a reason. And if I can learn from those mistakes to ensure that further downstream I can help navigate a situation or challenge better because of those lessons, then it's a lesson well served. And that's how I view those two quite painful things for me personally. But I generally believe it's helped me further in life because of the lessons learned.
That's really interesting, and there's something that really interested me as well. You wrote about this concept of greed versus ambition,
Yeah.
which I really liked. And you said greed is about the individual and the individual's needs and desires. Ambition is about your team and even the world at large. It's your contribution to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Can you delve into that a little bit more? Where did that come from? Is that something you say to your teams and etc.?
I don't necessarily say it to my team, but it's something that I've always thought about and reflected on. I've always been ambitious, but I've often thought, what is the difference between ambition and greed? Because, what does ambitious mean? Is it I want to, own the world and have private jets and, have lots of money in the bank, and, I've always thought that I am ambitious, but it's not been that product of money. Of course, we all want money. No one's going to say, no, they don't want money. And I certainly am not one of those. But at the same time, my purpose for building my business wasn't about the exit that I ultimately got, which made me financially very well off, but more about the impact I would have on other people, the clients that we serve, but also the people that came through that journey. And I think that's what ambition is. I'm not sure if that's a technical response or if you Google it, whether that is. But in my head, ambition is something where you've got that drive and hunger and that goal. And it's not just about you. It's about the people and the journey. And, my greatest achievement, without doubt, when people ask me, what is your greatest achievement? They expect me to say, I started, scaled and sold a business. Yeah, that was great. And it was a byproduct. But it was a byproduct of my real greatest achievement was the impact I had on people who came on that journey, who, we used to have the saying at the buy-to-let business, it doesn't matter if you're a burger flipper from McDonald's or an MBA graduate from Harvard, if you've got the right mindset, we'll bring you on board. And we recruited so many at the time. Many failed. I'm not going to say that it was always 100% success, but many went on to do great things. And they didn't have great qualifications. They didn't have, decorated career history. In fact, I would very rarely look at their CV, would bring them in, would interview them, and has that person got the right mindset and attitude to really be successful? And to me, empowering those people and building that team and growing that business and that growth mindset and investment mindset is very different to a spending mindset and that just end monetary goal. Because let's face it, there's no difference between myself and Elon Musk in reality, apart from his very healthy bank balance, is because we all have one life.
Yeah.
And it's like what we do in that one life. And in the grand scheme of things, without wanting to get too deep and philosophical, someone once told me there was more grains of sand on this earth. There are more planets in the solar system than there are grains of sands on this earth, which gives you perspective, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you
I love
realise,
quotes like that.
It makes you realise that we're just an insignificant nothing, really. So make the most of what you got, and to me, making the most of what you got is leaving a legacy and helping other people along the way, and growing something, and that's ambition. And greed is maybe just wanting the end goal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you also write about the best rewards are the hardest won. And so new people coming into the industry now, obviously we talked about they're different. They want everything yesterday. Yeah. What's your advice to them generally?
Pretty old school. Knuckle down, work hard. I think, and that's what the greatest rewards, come the hardest fought, effectively. And that's that. Nothing comes easy in life. I think unless you're very few lucky that win the lottery or at the right time at the right place, and even the right time in the right place, I often say that you make your own luck, because if you're that's just a sales call. You can say, I got lucky, I did that, I won that sales business because I was in the right time at the right place. Well, possibly, but possibly not. It's because you were proactive in calling and reaching out to customers, and you did it on such a regular basis that you made your own luck and you made yourself in that right time. You're not going to be in the right time, right place if you just sit on your backside. So I think that the advice really to newbies coming into the market is that it's a great industry that will reward you if you work hard. But, it won't come easy. You're going to have to roll up your sleeve, and you're going to have a lot of long, hard... we used to get our guys through, bear in mind a lot of them didn't have academic backgrounds. We used to get them through CMAP in a couple of months and at the same time learn about the industry. Some of these people couldn't even spell mortgage, let alone, write a mortgage. And those first 3 or 6 months were just brutal. And they weren't, we have a pipeline business. Any mortgage I write, even if I wrote a mortgage on day one, I probably wouldn't get paid for it.
That's right.
They've month 4 or 5 at best. And the reality is you're not going to write a mortgage on day one because you're still learning. So, you can't expect to really earn money in probably until 2, 3, 4 years. And that's quite difficult because the structure we had was a very low basic. So you're going, oh, Jesus, am I ever going to earn any more? And it's having that belief, the trust in the people around you, trust in the blueprint in the system, and listen to the knowledge around you. And if you follow those basic principles, you will maximise your opportunity for success.
And so you've exited.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's right. How big was the business when you exited?
Well, at its largest...
You don't need to give me figures.
No,
but, I mean in terms of people headcount.
Well, headcount, the largest was about 2018. We were just shy of 200, about 194, I remember thinking. But when we actually exited off the backdrop of COVID, I think we were kind of in the early 100s. Yeah. And I think they're currently now 120, 130, 140 strong, whatever it might be. It was great, and it was something that some people think it was, oh God, that was very quick. But actually, I did a deal countrywide in 2016, and it was kind of a 5-year plan with them. And obviously that came in 2021, and it just happened. Obviously, countrywide well documented and some challenges that they had towards the end of that time. But Connells came in and with that got the right to exercise the option at a price that we were both agreeable at. It's worked really well for me, and was the plan. People often ask, was that the plan at the beginning? And we wrote a business plan. I think it was a 10-year business plan in the early days, and it took 15 years. But it was to grow and to scale and to sell the business. And the intention was always to do that. And I've always been relatively open, in discussing that. It's been great, and it is given me the free time. I'll do a lot more lunches now. I come on great podcasts like this, which I don't think I would have if I was running a business, because you're just so busy doing what you do, right? It's great. Semi-retired is a loose term, because I would probably still say I'm reasonably actively involved, but it's very different, completely different to running a large business, hands-on. I have a lot more time. I spend a lot of time with my family. I never work Fridays. I work 6-8 hour days rather than 12, 15-hour days. So
living the dream, Ying.
Wow. I'm still only 47.
You put in the effort.
And then that goes back to what I say is, you put in that effort in the early days, because, people talk about work-life balance, and that's great. And I'm a big advocate with that. But when you're starting a business, that's very difficult to actually achieve. I don't think I achieve that. I certainly achieve it now. But I had to kind of make it very one-sided. I had to really invest in my work in the early days while I was building that business, and it's not as easy as people think. Just the work-life balance. If you want to build a career, if you want to build a business that's successful, but you put the hard graft in now to don't have to put in such hard graft later in life is probably the best way to describe it.
So now you're fintech.
Yes,
and doing all stuff like that.
I almost
you look
my,
very fintech.
Well, I was going to say I almost brought my holy jeans in, but I thought maybe that's too much. I wasn't sure if it was a TV podcast or an audio.
No.
It's been great. Knowledge Bank is obviously one of the investments I've done. I'm non-executive chair there, and Nicola and the team do a fantastic job and a great tool that they provide for the marketplace, and they've got some really exciting new products that they're hopefully going to be bringing in over the next 12 or 18 months to not just the broker community but the lending community.
Right,
but
interesting.
I'm also, when we built Dynamo, we built a really good tech product as well, a CRM system effectively, but no one knew about it. But I think it was 10 years ahead of its time, and on par to some of the great systems that are out there now, but this was 10, 15 years ago. But no one knew about it because it was just for our business. So tech has always been at the forefront of everything that I've done. I'm really passionate, and if there is a passion on me since I've exited, it's that I still believe, and as I know you do, that there's so much that we as an industry do that is monotonous, mundane, repetition, duplication. And with all the money that's been chucked into the industry, no one's yet cracked it.
No, they haven't.
And there is a bit of me, being the kind of the drive and hunger and ambitious person I am, that I want to be one of those people who help solve that issue, because it's just so frustrating when you see the kind of monotonous manual tasks that are still going on. I know everyone uses the comparison. I look at Netflix and then what happened to Blockbuster, look at Uber, and clearly mortgages is a very different beast with all the intricacies and different parties that are involved. But that said, there is enough technology out there now to make it far more straightforward and simpler and pain, less painful for the customer, which is ultimately what we're trying to benefit here.
Yeah.
For that process of applying mortgage, it's still so terribly long and painful. And why? What can we do more? And I am, along with lots of many other people, no doubt, really want to try and solve that problem.
Well, good luck with that.
I'll need it.
We've been waiting a few years.
Far too long. Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. But I've got two last questions.
Yes, go on.
What is the best single piece of advice you've ever had, and who was it from?
Probably. I mean, there's lots of. I said lots of it. I've never had a mentor, which people find quite strange. I've never had a mentor, someone to look up to. I act as a mentor to a lot of people at the moment, but I've never had a mentor myself. My mentor was my sister and my mum and dad. And my mum and dad didn't come from a business or academic background. But there was one thing that always sticks with me, my mum said, and it's just to keep it simple. Keep it simple. And I often revert back to that when I'm trying to complicate things, especially, talking about tech and you start doing these workflow processes and you go, Jesus Christ. And it's just to keep it simple. And, I often remind myself that I've got to keep it simple when I try to complicate things too much. And I think having that clarity has really helped me in life. And if I was to choose another one, and it wasn't necessarily advice per se, but it was the example which my dad taught me, and that was, as we touched on it earlier, if you say you're going to do something, do it. Because I think that's one of the strongest reasons why I've been able to build a strong team which has been loyal and very good cultures. Because if I said I have something to do, then I would deliver it. Because that's when, if you say something and you don't deliver, that's where negativity, a toxic environment comes in place. And, But you've got to be careful to make sure that when you do say it, you can actually follow through with it. Because some things just can't be achieved. So, but give transparency, Monty. If you can't achieve it, explain why you can't achieve it. And I think even though they don't understand why you've made those decisions, they understand it's for the best for the business, and you've given them rationale of why you're doing what you're doing. And I think those simple bits of advice has helped me, grow the business.
And I don't know why I thought of this question. If you could meet anyone in history, who would it be, and what question would you ask them?
I've often thought this question, and I think some people probably think you're going to go with someone famous, but mine, and you've probably could gather the theme that I'm a family man, 5 kids, my roots are really important, is actually my great-grandfather. He came from China to Malaysia in 1920, and he changed his surname. So originally I'm not a Tan, I'd like to ask him why he changed that surname, because there were stories going around that he'd been a bit of a rascal and left China under bad terms and kind of jumped into a boat and changed his surname. And we've tried to do some digging, and I don't know, I'm really into DNA, and I've done DNA testing to try and trace roots, but we've never got to the answer. And that's the one thing that I'd love to know. So I'm only really a 4th generation Tan, really. Even though, interestingly, and this will really blow your mind, we engaged a genealogist recently who was able to trace our roots back to 115 generations. On the male line. It was absolutely blew my mind.
He related to some kind of emperor,
the Yellow Emperor, who's supposed to be they can trace the lineage back to the Yellow Emperor, who's that's considered the founder of the Chinese race. Which was just blew my mind, frankly.
That's extraordinary.
But because I guess here in the West, all our records are kept centrally. So if you want to look for death certificates, birth certificates, but that only goes back 300 or 400 years. In Asia or in China, they keep it in the family temples. So if you know what villages your great grandparents came from, you can go there and then you can kind of trace it all back. A lot of it was ruined and burnt in the wars, of course, but many still exist. So going back to your question, I think in 1920 my great grandfather left China to go to Malaysia. And he was only a young lad, and there's loads of stories that I've heard growing up, but I'd like to ask him, why did you change, your surname, and what was the reason? And if it was something bad, to tell him, don't worry about it, and because I'm sure that was not an easy thing to do, to leave family under potentially difficult circumstances to start a new life somewhere and kind of a new identity. So
there you go. That's fascinating. Thank you so much.
Oh, Monty, it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been really, really interesting. I'm sure loads of people will get so much from that. And thank you for being Well, the inspiration you are, Ying, to
Thank you.
so many people.
Thank you, and really appreciate you, and thank you for all you do for the industry as well.
So, thank you all so much for listening. And if you do like this, then do please pass it on to others, leave a rating or a review in your podcast app. I have 15 people already lined up from all walks of life to come and talk to us. And I'm sure you'll be interested to hear their journeys and the paths that they have taken to get where they are today. This is the Pathfinder podcast. May the path you take be the right one for you.